Hello, and thanks a lot for joining us today, for joining this discussion, another discussion of the South Caucasus Dialogue platform format. Today we will focus on several issues. The first issue, of course, is war in Ukraine, current status of this war, and how it affects regional cooperation, regional developments, regional security issues. Of course, we'll focus on Azerbaijani-Armenian developments because lots of meetings took place in recent weeks and months. And the last one was just recently in Brussels, which is very, promising. And I hope that some positive agenda will not only appear, but will be implemented soon. Our speakers today is a representative of Armenia, Georgia, and Azerbaijan. It's Mr. Richard Garkasyan, who is the director of Regional Studies Center, Mr. Ahmad Ali, who is the director of Caucasus Policies Analysis Center, and Ms. Tiona Akubardia from Georgia will join us soon. She is a deputy chair of the Committee on Defense and Security of Georgian Parliament. And please, yes, I would like to start from Armenian and Azerbaijani perspective on current situation, opening remarks, 7-8 minutes, please. And topics we're focusing on today, how current war against Ukraine affect your country or your foreign policy or resolution of the situation in conflict in Karabakh. Do we see any changes? How Russia affects this process at the moment? And we will start from Azerbaijan today. Mr. Ahmad Ali, please.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be with you once more and look to the prospects and the developments happening in the region together. So it's a really great format. So thank you very much for this format once more. So about I believe the most important thing that we see right now is the EU's role in the processes. What is happening, it demonstrates that this EU format, EU platform, helping Azerbaijan and Armenia to move on with their peace agenda is becoming really, the main, I would say, platform. And the EU is not like in past years. You would see that usually EU would be less active in political issues, more active on social economic issues, more active working with the civil society, and less activity at the track one level. But we see that the EU is much more active at this level. And so far we know that there are two platforms where Azerbaijan and Armenia can negotiate. This is the platform led by Russia and the platform led by the European Union. So I believe that now we see that EU platform is there is a much more progress in this platform. So this is very important. I would say that what happened in Ukraine, what happened in the South Caucasus in 2020, that pushes all international actors to be more active in our region and especially European Union. So, and I would say that the another issue that I want to cover in this regard is the president's and the prime minister, the leaders' attitude to the process. I would say that both of them kind of seems interested in this format. They are interested that this negotiation that taking place with the mediation of the European Union to get interest, to get much more, to get much more results out of this platform. So that's also another positive step in this area. Also, I'm happy in this statement by President Charles Michel to see that there is the border issue, connectivity issue, peace agenda, and there is each relevant bodies responsible for that. So the prime ministers, Minister of Foreign Affairs, they each get some portion. And when it's about the social economic development, you see that it's about EU and how EU wants to be part of this process. So it's also it creates quite a important message to all the parties. And it shows that EU is ready to get into this issue. But the biggest question in Azerbaijan right now, aftermath of the meetings, and it is already the third meeting in Brussels, and there is agreement that's going to be another meeting in the future in July, August. The biggest question in Azerbaijan and Azerbaijan public agenda, it's about implementation of the agreed the documents, agreed steps. So usually that's the most challenging part. So when you can agree on certain steps, but then the implementation gets quite hard, and especially internal resistance. In Armenia, we see some opposition members in Armenia on the streets. So I believe that Richard is going to cover that issue much more, but just Azerbaijan perspective, that how Pashinian government going to be successful in implementation of the agreed, of these achievements. And it's also even in journalists, you can sense that even in journalists, basically everyone is asking the very same question, that what's going to be different this time? So because the last processes, we saw that there was some achievement, but then we did not see some follow-up. So again, my answer usually to that kind of question is that this is not going to be a linear process. It's going to be a process where we take 2 steps ahead and 1 step back. So 2 steps forward and 1 step backward. So that's how we're going to move on. And it shows that this is another step the Armenian and Azerbaijan leaders, they took. And I believe that it creates a good platform for the advancement in the next stages. And Azerbaijan, I believe it's pushing hard because it is time of the global and regional change. So South Caucasus should get ready for the upcoming change, and we should create supranational platforms. We should create some regional platform, security platform, economic development platform. And I believe that the various sectors of the economy can get integrated. And I believe that this is why Azerbaijan is also pushing now hard and is interested in achieving some results with Armenia so that it can move to the next step and create a common, I would say, platform, the resilience within the South Caucasus, so it can be like creating resistance for the future dangers to the region. Another issue that was quite well exposed in Azerbaijan, and I believe in Armenia, it's about the security and the rights of the Karabakh Armenians in as part of the peace agreement, as President Sharm el-Sheikh said. I believe that this is the point that got quite a big attention from all interested parties in Azerbaijan. And in that sense, I believe that it's important that we take into account the concerns and human rights of Karabakh Armenians. Also, it's human rights, part of the human rights, and Karabakh Azerbaijani's human rights is also in this context should be put the equal stand with the Karabakh Armenians. It's very important. And about the status, I believe that status should not be discussed between Baku and Yerevan. When in 1988, when the whole process started, Karabakh Armenians, the main objective was that it was the consensus, 1923 consensus, how Bolsheviks created the Nagorno-Karabakh Autonomous Oblast, but left it within Azerbaijan. That's not satisfying their needs. It means that there should be the homegrown consensus to that. So I believe that in this sense, Karabakh Armenians and Azerbaijanis should talk more about their life together, how they're going to decide their fate, and should not be discussed between Baku and Yerevan. So, but overall, the process is the meeting in Brussels that demonstrated that once more EU platform is gaining more ground and getting the primary platform for Azerbaijan and Armenia. And I believe that EU's involvement in this context is going to help Armenia and Azerbaijan to achieve their peace soon. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your opening remarks. And of course, I will have follow-up questions to you after opening remarks from Mr. Richard Garkasan. And Richard, if possible, I would like to ask you to make opening remarks and maybe a bit focus on how Russia's war against Ukraine affects Armenia and regional developments. And also, Ahmad said the question from journalists is usually, how is it different? Why do we believe that now this process will move forward? I mean, communications and etc. Why do you believe it will now move forward, please?
Thank you very much, Igor. And thank you again for the opportunity. In terms of the most significant aspect of today's event is the word dialogue. And this is exactly what's been missing. For too long, we've been talking past each other instead of talking to each other. So I do want to frame a narrative focusing on three specific transformative trends. The first trend that is most visible is the trend of milestones. And specifically, we have three different turning points or a trend of milestones. The first, of course, was the end of the devastating war in November 2020 that ended with a projection of Russian power, with a peacekeeping deployment that for the first time ever, Russia garnered and acquired a military presence on the ground. The second turning point or milestone was the post-war transformation, where we've moved from the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict to bilateral security and negotiations. In other words, unlike Nagorno-Karabakh as an issue, as a conflict, we are now in a transformative stage of bilateral negotiations between Armenia and Azerbaijan, where many of the issues have little to do with Nagorno-Karabakh directly and are related to the reflection of the new landscape in the region. Beyond the post-war transformation, the third milestone, of course, came in late February with the unjustified, egregious Russian invasion of Ukraine, which has changed everything overnight. And if we look closer here, if the first trend were these milestones, the second trend is, of course, geopolitics. And there are three specific elements of this geopolitical trend. The first is the impressive engagement by the European Union. And in many ways, the European Union has replaced Russia as the primary initiator of diplomacy. In this context, the meetings in Brussels that began in December have become now a process rather than a venue. And most significantly, for the first time ever, there's a degree of staff support. Preliminary meetings between Armenian and Azerbaijani officials in preparation for each round of summits. This gives greater depth and substance to the talks and negotiations, and Brussels is playing a key role that neither the US nor Russia could play. In terms of the viability of the European engagement, it is a validation of EU concepts, connectivity, in terms of the restoration of road and rail links, of trade. And it's based on a new novel premise. For the first time in history, economics and trade are now accepted as genuine incentives for post-war stability. And this should not be underestimated in terms of addressing insecurity and potential instability. The second important element of this geopolitical trend is a move away from force of arms back to diplomacy. The return to diplomacy is a reversal of the dangerous precedent from the war of 2020, which, if left unchallenged, tends to validate or legitimize military means over diplomacy. Now we have a constructive return to diplomacy. And the third geopolitical trend is Armenia's twin track diplomacy. There are two parallel tracks in Azerbaijan, of course, but I'm referring to Armenia-Turkey normalization. This is the second track. And both tracks provide synergy and momentum to each other. And finally, the third trend, if you will, is looking forward, scenario planning and outlook. And what's coming is another threat. A storm is on the horizon. I'm greatly worried and concerned because no matter what happens in Ukraine, no matter what turns out on the battlefield, we do have an angry, isolated, resentful president of Russia. And I'm greatly worried that no matter what happens, Putin is going to lash out at all of his neighbors, from the Baltics to Moldova to Central Asia and the Caucasus. We will most likely face an angry, weak, isolated Russia that will threaten all of its neighbors. And I think this is the coming challenge. For diplomacy between Armenia and Azerbaijan, we have to build enough momentum to sustain resiliency in anticipation of a coming Russian storm, if you will. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. I don't see Tona for now, so I will just say some words about Georgia before we move forward with follow-up questions to our friends from Armenia and Azerbaijan. So first of all, of course, in Georgia, since the beginning of the war against Ukraine, the major issue is fear. I hear lots of voices saying that Russia may attack. And as we all know, on 17th of July, there is a referendum in so-called South Ossetia about joining Russia. From Russian perspective, they already said that it's not some kind of issue for us, but we know that there is no logic, unfortunately, and they may do anything from one side. From another side, Georgian government, I will just maybe list some facts without any deep analysis, because maybe our speaker will join later. There is a big issue for international community, because major question discussed is whether Georgian government is helping to avoid sanctions to Russian Federation through ports and other transport links. There are no facts or evidences, but there are lots of statements and critics towards Georgian government and attempts to identify whether this process is taking place. Unfortunately, again, there are some confrontation between the Georgian government and some European Parliament members, which means that Georgian government representatives criticize European Parliament members a lot when Georgia actually applied for EU membership right after Ukraine did. So Georgian society is divided, as it was before, but maybe even more. Government is very effective in using this fear of Russian invasion, which means that all public speeches are about we will not allow to open to start a war against Georgia again, and we will do anything possible or needed not to start a war against Georgia again. They criticize Ukrainian officials, which is very unfortunate, I would say, because of course Georgia and Ukraine are two countries facing joint challenges, and the war and the occupation and annexation, and maybe Georgia will see annexation soon as well. And this confrontation and polarization in Georgia is only rising. And I wouldn't say that government is trying to make it lower, to make this level lower, or to make different groups find some common ground and some compromise. No, unfortunately not. All discussions are, just a second. All discussions are between major opposition party and government attacks aggressively in all public statements Saakashvili and say that European Parliament members work for him and etc. etc. This is very unfortunate, and especially when Georgia is applying for EU membership and waiting for some replies from Brussels. So this is what Georgia experiences at the moment. Like another issue is, I should say it here, another issue is that general director of the major opposition TV channel, Nika Gvarame, who is a director of the major TV channel, Tavari, opposition TV channel, he is now in prison. And of course, all opposition representatives and also NGOs and civil society representatives say that it's politically motivated case and he is in jail illegally. And of course, it also doesn't help Georgia to get closer to European societies, communities, or pro-democratic communities. So this is what Georgia live like and see every day. People divided, people watch TV channels, like very polarized TV channels, like propaganda media, I mean states, like state-backed media TV channel Imedi, and 3 opposition TV channels with totally different perspective of what's going on in the country. Unfortunately, this is the reality we see on the ground, and I don't see lots of discussions on the government level how to secure Georgia, how to increase or enhance defense capabilities. The only discussion we hear, we will not let the war start again, with different kind of messages towards Moscow. But in parallel, they're trying to balance again and again, to balance between the Kremlin and the West, because they sign all documents, they apply for EU membership, but in parallel, again, trying to not to make Kremlin angry with all means they have. So this is the reality here in Georgia. And now I think we will just move to our regional developments. And Mr. Ahmad Ali, I will get back to you with my follow-up question. It's very important, like, again, a week ago, I talked to colleagues and journalists called me from Baku, asking for some comments and interviews, saying that, do you believe that it is still possible to have any kind of dialogue platforms with Russia? Because Russia attacks Ukraine, because there are people dying in Ukraine, whether Moscow, Kremlin, Russia is still some kind of reliable partner or actor for any kind of regional cooperation between actually Armenia and Azerbaijan. What is your idea about it? What is your vision?
I would say that there is a not united position on Russia and its role, in its, as Russians call it, close neighborhood in European Union, among European Union countries. So it's quite a debated question. From Azerbaijan perspective, I would say that the security architecture of the South Caucasus that up to this moment that required strong cooperation between Russia and Azerbaijan, because this is in order to keep the stability in the region, that was very important aspect to that. How it's going to change after the war in Ukraine, and there are a lot of questions, unanswered questions. Like as Richard mentioned, the storm is coming, geopolitical storm is coming, and did Russia, like let's say, and we know that the reality in the South Caucasus of the Karabakh War, the 2 main players that created this reality, external players that create this reality, they are Russia and Turkey. So in following the war in Ukraine, that balance is going to be changed in favor of Turkey. Then how the regional security architecture is going to look like. So to what extent Azerbaijan will need to cooperate with Russia to keep to keep the stability in the South Caucasus, in the regions that Azerbaijan is interested. How the situation is going to change in North Caucasus, how the situation is going to develop with Iran. So there are so many other questions that needs to be answered. So that's why the war in Ukraine that created a lot of let's say, unclear moments for Baku, I would say that, And I would like answering those questions at this moment is not fully, I would not try to answer this question, but I just know that there is a storm is coming. And up to this moment, the Russian-Azerbaijani cooperation was quite important in security terms, was quite important for the regional security in the South Caucasus. How it will develop in the later phase. So it's probably going to be dependent a lot on the strategy of Turkey, Iran, European Union, United States in the South Caucasus. And we see that with the, with this meeting in Brussels, and with the active engagement of the American diplomats to the South Caucasus affairs, we see that there is quite a growing interest from the European Union and the United States, the region also. So that's why there's the balance between these external powers that's going to create a new, I would say, the security reality in the region, and that's going to determine to what extent the plays a role Russia and its cooperation with Azerbaijan.
Thanks a lot. Richard, could you please tell me, do you expect Kremlin's role in regional developments between Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Turkey? How do you evaluate it? And like my friends, colleagues from both Armenia and Azerbaijan told me that like Kremlin is trying to undermine somehow all of this effective processes and counter Brussels format. Do you see that? What is your perspective?
Very good question. I disagree strongly. In other words, analytically, we have been concerned, but as yet we see no evidence whatsoever of Russia interfering or blocking either Armenia-Turkey negotiations or Armenian-Azerbaijani diplomacy. The reason I think is interesting, because the European Union process between Armenia and Azerbaijan is predicated on the premise of a Russian peacekeeping deployment, which was unilateral. And the European Union engagement is generally legitimizing that Russian presence. So I do think Russia is distracted, has lost the diplomatic monopoly between Armenia and Azerbaijan, but is not yet threatened by the European Union engagement. And at the same time, we still see all regional projects of restoration of trade, transport under Russian management and participation. So I do think we should be concerned, we should be alert, but we have no signs or evidence at this point of any Russian interference. It's probably because Moscow is both distracted and simply overwhelmed.
The follow-up question to both speakers, and first, please, Richard. Just a week ago or less, I talked to colleagues from Azerbaijan, and before this meeting in Brussels, they were saying that nothing is moving forward, there is no progress, and we are not sure that there will now be new military confrontation, even maybe a war or some direct strikes. Such kind of rhetorics I hear again and again. But like before this recent meeting in Brussels a week ago, do you see any kind of, now we just discussed some positive trends, some positive, possible positive issues, but in parallel, I hear such voices from Baku, for example, and then Ahmad will also comment on this. What is your vision? Do you see any kind of danger of the conflict, of another war or some kind of military confrontation?
Thank you for the question. Let me jump in first. In a strategic context, I don't see any preparation or posture suggesting a resumption of open hostilities. However, in the post-war period, we saw a series of clashes and incidents, even within Armenian territory. But I do think that localized tension has subsided now that we have substantive negotiations. The first part of your question regarding the process, I was frustrated that both sides missed a deadline for the meeting of a new working group on border demarcation. It was supposed to convene at the end of April, and they missed that deadline. So we do see, like Armenia, Turkey, some advances, some progress, and then some steps backward. But under the circumstances, I am somewhat optimistic, mainly because it was never supposed to be this quick or this easy. Nevertheless, the return to diplomacy is a welcome respite after what we saw in the devastating war of 2020. But going forward, I think this dialogue is very important because it's only going to continue. We're not even halfway in terms of a long process of post-war negotiations. And I do think the real test and challenges are going to come for both sides.
Before I move to Ahmad, please, Richard, do you believe that these protest activities, protest rallies of Armenian opposition will allow Armenian government to move forward with all of these formats, and maybe first of all, Armenian-Turkey resolution?
Well, I do think it's revealing how many times I talked about the opposition demonstrations in my opening remarks. The fact that I didn't even mention it reflects my analysis that I'm concerned, but I'm not worried. I'm amused, but I'm not impressed. The window of opportunity for the opposition has closed a long time ago. Now it's too little too late. The immediate aftermath of the war was the only viable chance to replace the Pashinian government. I think the current incumbent Armenian government is much more self-confident, much more secure, because it was re-elected in an early election last June. The opposition lost the election, I'm sorry, and they don't have an alternative. They're very good at opposing, but they're not proposing any alternative. So I really think a self-confident, legitimate, democratically elected government in Armenia will actually continue to follow the statesmanship course with both Armenia, Turkey, and Armenia, Azerbaijan. The damage is done. And I don't think the opposition demonstrations will really pose a serious challenge. In fact, just the opposite. They're running out of steam.
Yeah, sounds good. Ahmad, please, could you please also comment on if there is no progress, if Baku will not see that this agreement is not moving forward, nothing is happening, do you consider any kind of opportunity of some kind of military involvement in this process, new wave of confrontation, military confrontation? Because again, I just heard it from colleagues from Baku that if there is no progress, there could be some clashes again. How do you see the situation, please?
First of all, I answered the question about Russia, but probably I answered the other part of the question, like the part that you were interested that I left unanswered. Sorry about that. So I will try to touch on that issue, but it's also important, the opposition in Armenia. We saw that the numbers, they are not that high. It shows the general majority of the people in Armenia, they support the peace agenda of Pashinian administration. So that's how we read the situation from Azerbaijan. So that group, that protest movement can be boosted by the help of the external powers, especially diaspora component in this issue. So this is the way you have foreign powers not interested in the progress of the EU platform, and you have the foreign powers interested in controlling this process also. If these two components, the internal protest movements and the foreign powers who don't want this process to succeed, so if they merge, if they join their efforts, there can be a bit some different outcome, I would say, and that's going to put the process into the pause once more. But the Pashinian government, they demonstrated that they are quite capable of as Richard rightly mentioned, what happened with the elections. That's, by the way, Pashinyan winning is one of the strongest peace messages to Azerbaijan society, that Pashinyan's vision and his vision of the processes is supported by the general, the majority of the general population. So that kind of issues, that shows that Pashinyan government is quite successful, and they will be able to overcome this challenge also. So again, I do not expect any linear process when it's about Armenian Azerbaijani peace agenda. I expect that there will be quite many, other, let's say, directions that will come back to the main direction. So in this case, I believe that this is the possible scenario. But about that, what happens if there is no progress? I would say that what happened with Iran several months ago, that demonstrates that Baku still has options to put pressure on Yerevan without military means. So it means that, for example, if there was the corridor that connects the western parts of Azerbaijan to Nakhchivan, if it doesn't work out, so Baku has option to use the Iranian option. So there is other options, and one of the biggest, let's say, tools in hands of Baku is not doing any economic cooperation with Armenia, just keeping Armenia in out of this economic regional integration projects. So that's also another tool. So I believe that Baku has the tools before it can use military tool or other tools. So that's why so far the situation seems to me that military tool or the war in Baku's arsenal, that's not in the first place at all.
Yeah, thanks. And follow-up question to you also. You mentioned, I think, Turkish role, and I would say a bit more words about it. So Turkey is one of the important supporters of Ukraine at the moment. And do you, in Azerbaijan, feel any kind of pressure from the Kremlin because of this support? Because Azerbaijan is also supporting Ukraine in many means. I mean, humanitarian assistance, statements, rhetorics, and actually huge support of civil society in Azerbaijan, of just people. I read Telegram channels, Azerbaijani Telegram channels, and I see that entire Azerbaijan is very actively supporting Ukraine in this crisis, during this war against Ukraine. So what is your perception of this? And yeah.
Okay. I believe we once discussed this issue with you several months ago, but it's Baku, the copy-pasted Russian tactics during the 2020 Karabakh War. It means that the Russian generals would be actively supporting, the parties, but when it's about the peace agenda, Russian Minister of Foreign Affairs that would talk only about peace, and at the end, Russian president was the person whose signature is on the document of, three-party statement on the 10th of November in 2020. So Baku copy-paste the same position right now. So it helps Ukraine with everything possible. But when it talks about, when it's about the peace, Azerbaijani president and other leaders of, other high-ranking diplomats in Azerbaijan, they talk about the peace between Russia and Ukraine. So it means that Russia cannot the protest against it, because it's the same strategy, it's the same tactic Russia used against Azerbaijan during the 2020 Karabakh War. So I believe that in this context, Azerbaijan plays it smart. So that's why the Kremlin, even there is there is no additional, let's say, reason for Kremlin to put pressure on Baku on this issue. But again, Azerbaijan helps Ukraine with everything possible, humanitarian aid. SOCAR is providing all the oil and other products to the local emergency services. So in this context, I believe that the Baku is taking the position where Moscow cannot put more than the pressure that Kremlin can put to the other countries.
There is just a short question, please, Ahmad. Question for Ahmad Ali from our chat. Which foreign powers do not want Armenian and Azerbaijani negotiations to succeed?
Well, basically everyone wants its agenda to be the main agenda in the South Caucasus, but so far, as we know that this is this region, South Caucasus, used to be seen from the West as the Russian backyard. So losing that status in the region is quite a devastating blow to Moscow. So Russia will do everything possible not to, the whole process to be. Russia is going to do everything possible so it can be a main mediator in this process. So that's why I believe that in this context we can understand the Russian activities, but also Iran. So there is so many other players in this context. So again, geopolitical storm is coming, and it's hard to predict what is going to happen to the region in the next 2 or 3 years. The main thing is now to move fast with Armenia and Azerbaijan peace agenda, to have some agreements, and to move with the regional integration, so that when there is some challenges arising, the challenges toward the regional countries, we can all act together. So I believe that in this context, this is the main point we have to focus on.
Richard, please, maybe very difficult question, but anyway, after 24th of February, is Russia, Putin's Russia, we say it, still the major and closest ally and partner of Armenia? And how people in Armenia see the war, Russia's war against Ukraine? How would you evaluate support towards Russia and towards Ukraine in Armenia, please?
Well, if I can step back, it was the war in 2016 that first demonstrated the limitations of the Armenian-Russian security relationship. In other words, there was a deep, profound, pre-existing crisis in the relationship between Armenia and Russia, where the security promises, the military guarantees, were proven to be empty and hollow. And I do think well before 2020, Armenia realized the limitations of the danger of over-reliance, over-dependence on Russia. This has become much worse, where Armenia, after the invasion of Ukraine, is in between a rock and a hard place, as we would say. In other words, the challenge to Armenia is being on the wrong side of history under Putin. And I do think that Armenia's response to the invasion of Ukraine has been one to do as little as possible, to say as little as possible, to hide behind the Georgians, both geographically but also geopolitically. In other words, not to provoke a Russian angry response, but in terms of abstentions and voting, following a strategy to mitigate the danger. And in this context, I do think Prime Minister Pashinian, as a legitimate democratically elected leader, is a different value for Putin. In other words, it's the opposite of Lukashenko in Belarus. Pashinian has become a prize or a trophy for President Putin, well under control at this point. That's not good for Armenian independence or sovereignty, but it also shows our fundamental problem in Armenia is the lack of an alternative to Pashinian, not necessarily an alternative to policy, but an overdependence on personalities. This is also the case in Russia. where there is a distinction we have to make between Putin and Russians. In other words, Putin is not all of Russians, thank God. And I do think that's important in terms of also a more nuanced approach and preparation for the day after Putin, where a weak Russia is a very different challenge and threat to us than the Putin Russia. And I do think we have to begin scenario planning for the day after Putin.
Thanks a lot, but please, if possible, briefly, I just visited Armenia not so long ago, and I also saw and met lots of people who support Ukraine. Like majority, how would you say? Do they support Ukraine? Do they see that Ukraine is on the right side of the history?
Well, the problem is Ukraine was an outspoken supporter of Azerbaijan and Azerbaijani territorial integrity. So it's not as black and white for many Armenians. But there is also growing dissatisfaction with the egregious actions by the Russians, not just the invasion, but the human rights abuses, the egregious crimes that are being committed. What's most interesting is the lessons, however. From Kazakhstan to Armenia and Azerbaijan, the most interesting lesson learned is just how weak Russia really is militarily. And I do think that is feeding a new threat assessment where fear of the Russian military is now much less because of their disastrous performance against Ukraine.
Thanks a lot. Before my last question to both speakers, I would like to ask what Mr. Ambassador Chichelashvili wrote to Ahmad. Ahmad, please. How negotiations with EU is progressing on new agreement? Is Trans-Caspian component part of negotiations, having in mind EU energy embargo policy developments? Please, Ahmad. Your microphone is off.
Yes, sorry. I believe that right now, Baku and Brussels right now, they are not only focused on Armenia-Azerbaijan deal, they are quite interested in other aspects. And I believe that in the both statements, they say that they discussed other issues that is interest. So, and recently we've seen quite intensive activity of the various European diplomats traveling to Azerbaijan, and we have seen European leaders traveling to Azerbaijan, and we see that the Trans-Caspian cooperation is quite important in this context. That it's mostly, I would say that the European Union is looking for now for something really short term, just right now, what can replace Russian oil and gas to Europe, but also now there is a talk about the more long-term cooperation. And I believe that whatever is happening between Baku and Brussels in this context, Tbilisi must be aware of that because that route is going to pass through Georgia. So I believe that Tbilisi is going to be essential component of that. And I believe that together with the Armenia, Georgia, Azerbaijan, we are in the region where in the north is Russia, in the south is Iran, and we are the place where if you want to do some cooperation with Central Asia and they get to the Chinese neighborhood, so you have to have a strong presence in this region. So in this context, I believe that European Union agenda for the region is changing, and it's changing quite fast. So I believe that the Trans-Caspian cooperation is quite an essential part of this processes.
Yeah, and my last question first, maybe Ahmad, because you're now speaking. Like a week ago, you just mentioned Tbilisi. Like a week ago, there was an article, and actually it's discussed among communities. There was an article on CNN website that if Putin fails in Ukraine, he may invade Georgia or put some military pressure on Georgia. I would say that I'm not very supporting this narrative because from my point of view, what we see in Georgia at the moment is totally fine for the Kremlin. But in case it happens, what would be Azerbaijani reaction if Russia puts some military pressure on Georgia or invades?
Well, I can say that Azerbaijan's access to the Black Sea and Azerbaijan's access to Turkey is quite important for Baku. So, and I believe that the same thing for Turkey, the access via Georgia to Azerbaijan and then to the Central Asia is highly important for Turkey also. So, if there is some problem in these routes, I would say that joint Azerbaijan-Turkish action is more than possible. But what is going to be that's a question, quite a debatable the question, and that it should be discussed in more detail. But right now, before joining your webinar, I was hearing the Turkish F-16s flying over our heads in Baku. So they are here. It's a Turkish acrobatics group in Baku right now. And several days ago, the latest Bayraktar Akıncı that flew from the western regions of Turkey to Baku, to the eastern part of the Azerbaijan, flew over Georgia. So I believe that this all part of the power demonstration of Turkey in this region. So that's why, again, these routes that connects Azerbaijan to the Black Sea and the Turkey and the other way around is very important. So that's why I believe that any action, anybody trying to change that, it's going to have a strong resistance from Azerbaijan and Turkey.
Thanks a lot for this answer, and I was sure it will be like this. And now, please, Richard, and actually the same question, what will be reaction in Armenia? But I would like to add a question from Ambassador Chilashvili, who is saying Russia will threaten its neighbors. That's true. Do you see capacity for trilateral answer to this threat from South Caucasus? Ahmad just said about trilateral answer from Turkey, Georgia, Azerbaijan. What is your perspective on trilateral South Caucasus answer?
Well, for your first question, I do think in the event of Russian military aggression against Georgia, again, like in 2008, the honest response in Armenia will most likely be, thank God it's not us, and appreciation that we do not have a land border with Russia. More than that, I don't expect much of a reaction. And moreover, as an American, from a military perspective, I'm very skeptical that any response will be adequate to counter Russia against Georgia, especially given the reality today, the Georgian military is much weaker than ever before. And the current Georgian government does very little to inspire confidence, in my opinion. Having said that, I share your skepticism. Russia has performed so badly, has failed to understand Ukraine. I don't think it's quite capable of moving against Moldova or Georgia. The second question regarding the regional response, we do see the beginnings of a recognition of the shared threat of Russia to all independence and sovereignty of the three countries. But it's too soon to say. It's far too premature. However, Russia is in a position of weakness, not strength, in this region, and a position of insecurity, not confidence, which will help forge greater resiliency among our countries and making the South Caucasus what it has not been in a very long time, a region.
Thanks a lot for your answer, and actually it's very inspirational, I would say, because I hope that, as you said, it's just the beginning. Maybe it's a bit too late, and maybe now, if we were like three countries were ready to be united now, when Putin's Russia is making such aggressive steps, it would be much better. But again, we see role of European Union is getting higher, more important, so it's very important, and like hopefully we will see real progress and we will not have to get back to discussing some military aggression, etc. Thanks a lot for joining us today, and thanks a lot to our speakers and our guests. It was South Caucasus Dialog Platform webinar, and I think we'll meet in 2 months if nothing really huge happens before. Thank you for your time.